Good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Sally Nugent at Buckingham Palace, where the Queen's coffin has spent the night, and John Kay in Westminster. Our headlines this morning. Queen Elizabeth II will make her final journey from Buckingham Palace this afternoon. Crowds braved the rain to greet the coffin as it arrived from Edinburgh last night.
The procession will make the short journey up the Mall to here at the Palace of Westminster, where the Queen will then lie in state until the morning of her funeral. Hundreds of thousands of people are expected to pay their respects over the next 4 days, and the queues have already begun to form.
Today at 6, the Queen's coffin is now lying in state in the Palace of Westminster for the public to pay its final respects. It follows a solemn procession from Buckingham Palace with a horse-drawn gun carriage bearing Her Majesty. Walking behind her children and grandchildren, as well as other members of the royal family led by King Charles. Thousands of people witnessed the procession, some overcome by the emotion of the moment. And this is the scene at Westminster Hall, where the Queen's coffin will remain for 4 days before her state funeral next Monday. As many as 400,000 people are expected to file past the coffin in a final act of mourning.
It'll be kind of a good closure then as well to just see her, you know, and also just to, I don't know, give something back.
Good evening. The Queen's coffin is now lying in state in the Palace of Westminster after a final journey from Buckingham Palace witnessed by tens of thousands of people along the route. She was accompanied by King Charles and his sons, as well as other members of the royal family, walking behind the horse-drawn gun carriage bearing Her Majesty. The coffin, draped in the royal standard, will now lie in state in Westminster Hall for the next 4 days before a state funeral. In the last hour, members of the public have been allowed to file past to pay their respects. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has been following the day's events.
In a setting that is so familiar, where so often and so recently there has been celebration, today an event of the greatest solemnity. On the pavements around the palace and along the Mall, spectators were quiet and still. At 22 minutes past 2, the cortege stepped off. A field gun sounded, and the great bell known as Big Ben tolled. The coffin of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was brought from Buckingham Palace, where it had rested for a final night with her family. The coffin was borne on a gun carriage. On the coffin rested a wreath and the imperial state crown. Walking behind the coffin, the King, with his siblings, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York, who was not in uniform, and the Earl of Wessex. And in the row behind, Princes William and Harry, walking together 25 years after they'd followed the coffin of their mother to her funeral. The military detachments marched with their arms reversed. The cortege passed along the length of the Mall, dressed on either side with Union flags. As the coffin went past, from spectators, respectful applause. From Horse Guards, the cortege passed through the archway and onto Whitehall. On past the cenotaph where for so many years as Queen she had led the nation's mourning, now that nation with others mourns her. As the cortege approached Parliament Square and the Palace of Westminster, the applause from the pavements swelled. Many of those who were watching had travelled from afar, feeling an overwhelming obligation to be present, each wanting to be part of this moment in the nation's history and leaving with a precious memory. Outside Westminster Hall, the bearer party from the Grenadier Guards took the Queen's coffin on their shoulders. Other members of the royal family were there, watching on the left the Duchess of Sussex. The coffin, covered in the royal standard and surmounted by the Queen's crown, was placed with care on the catafalque. For the royal family, it's clear that the loss of the Queen is still being felt keenly. For all the stoicism, that quality that she represented in abundance, it's plain that some, the blood family and those who knew her over the years, are feeling very real grief. But now the late Queen has one final duty. Into Westminster Hall came the first watch of the vigil. The ceremonial bodyguard of the monarch and officers from the household cavalry, who will stand at the 4 points of the catafalque as the lying in state begins, and the people of Britain and beyond have their chance to pay their final respects to their late Queen.
Nick, the scenes today have been quite extraordinary. So many people stretching for miles wanting to say a final goodbye.
Yes, I wonder, you know, whether we are going to see this anything on this sort of scale or of this intensity again. These are images of immense power. The procession this afternoon and now, as you say, the lying in state. These are the latest pictures now from Westminster Hall, and I've been watching them over the past hour, and I think so many people come into Westminster Hall from outside and they're really rather awestruck, first of all, in this ancient hall and this really extraordinary sight, the raised catafalque, the coffin, the imperial state crown, and the yeoman warders or the gentlemen at arms and the household cavalry with their heads bowed and their arms reversed. And there are young people, there are people, I think we can say, from every walk of life. There are people from, I imagine, from around the United Kingdom and from beyond, and people are bowing. Some of them are saluting, some of them are weeping, and every one of these people, we know that they've queued. The queue at the moment, I think, is nearly 3 miles long. Every one of these people, every individual on a private and personal mission to pay their respects.
Indeed.
Well, people continue to fill up the waiting zones, and as you can see here in these pictures, there's a zigzag area on this side of the river just before people get close to the Palace of Westminster behind me. This is an operation that's due to last 4 more full days, so there are preparations for a queue that could stretch for as long as 10 miles in all. And you can see where it starts on the other side of the river and then over Lambeth Bridge, which is ahead of me. The atmosphere here is quiet, it's respectful, and people have a lot of stamina. Many have been here for many hours, but we've heard no complaints. For people here, it's a sacrifice that they are willing to make to be part of this momentous national occasion and to say a final farewell in person to the Queen.
So, what should people who joined the queue expect? Well, the lying in state began a little over an hour ago and will continue round the clock until 6:30 next Monday morning, the day of the Queen's funeral. The queue is expected to stretch for several miles from the Albert Embankment following the River Thames through to Southwark Park. Now, wristbands will be given out once people join the queue, but there's a warning: the wait could be several hours, possibly even overnight, to see the Queen's coffin. Airport-style security will be in place once visitors have crossed Lambeth Bridge and reached the Palace of Westminster before entering Westminster Hall. There'll also be a separate accessible route highlighted here in purple beginning at Tate Britain. Local venues and museums, including the National Theatre and Shakespeare's Globe, will stay open for extended hours for refreshments and comfort breaks. There will also be more than 500 portaloos along the route, but people are being asked to respect the dignity of the event and remain silent and dress appropriately while inside the Palace of Westminster. Filming, photography and the use of mobile phones won't be allowed inside. Well, the BBC is offering a continuous 24-hour view of the Queen's lying in state for those who won't be able to pay their respects in person and can't make it to London, or who are physically unable to queue.
And that is all from us this Wednesday evening, a stone's throw from Westminster Hall, where Her Majesty the Queen is now lying in state until her funeral on Monday. It has been an historic day here in the capital, and one that will live long in the nation's memory. We leave you now with the sound of the Southend Vox Choir and their tribute to the Queen. Good night.